bless you. We would like to welcome you to another session of Nuggets of Hope. This week, we start a new theme titled Biblical Inspirations. And each week, a different person from our church will present a lesson from a Bible character. And it's our hope that we can be encouraged by their lives and really see how it's their relationship with God that made the difference. They're not too different from us. They can get angry. They're characters who are confused. They're characters who are involved with big sins, who find themselves in crossroads, and they are not different than us. What makes the difference is God. And so our hope is that through each lesson that you can be encouraged that whatever we face, it's really God who makes the difference. Now, this week, I would like to share on the midwives of the time of Moses. And midwives have a special place in my heart because the one that I call my grandmother, even though I never met her, was a midwife in Puerto Rico. And in Puerto Rico, they will call them la comadronas. And they will be called and they will help in the delivery. Now, she's not my real grandmother because my grandmother went into labor and they called the midwife or comadrona, and the comadrona came to the house. But unfortunately, my real grandmother passed away during the delivery. And so the midwife, her name is Francisca, she took my father home and she raised him as her own. And so if we look at the definition of midwife, it's not just to assist in childbirth. It's really one that helps to produce or bring forth something. And she raised my father, and then from all that he learned from her, he raised my brothers and sisters. So midwives are very, very important. They step into a place despite how difficult the situations are. And we see that in Exodus chapter 1, in the time of Moses. And I'm going to begin to get a little idea of what was going on. Exodus chapter 1, verses 8. Then a new king to whom Joseph meant nothing came to power in Egypt. Look, he said to his people, the Israelites have become far too numerous for us. Come, we must deal shrewdly with them, or they will become even more numerous. And if war breaks out, we'll join our enemies, fight against us, and leave the country. So here we see the situation in verses 8 to 10, that there was an oppression or an oppressive force against the Israelites, right? They were seen as a threat. And in turn, the king sought to oppress them. Let's go down to verse 15. The king of Egypt said to the Hebrew midwives, whose names were Shipra and Puah, when you are helping the Hebrew women during childbirth on the delivery stool, if you see that the baby is a boy, kill him. But if it is a girl, let her live. The midwives, however, feared God and did not do what the king of Egypt had told them to do. They let the boys live. Then the king of Egypt summoned the midwives and asked them, why have you done this? Why have you let the boys live? You see, there was a situation of oppression, and the midwives were in a place of dilemma. And they could have followed what the king had asked them, but they didn't. Instead, because they feared God. And we serve a God of righteousness, a God of justice. What does it say in Micah 6:8? It talks about what the Lord requires of us. He requires us to do justice, right? To act justly, to love mercy, and walk humbly with God. And that is what the midwives chose to do. In the face of dilemma, in the face of oppression and injustice, they didn't back away. They didn't follow the mandates of the king, but instead they stepped in to make a difference. And it's important to know they stepped in, but they were putting their lives in danger. So they took the chance because they understood that God, what God calls us to be or do in a time of injustice, is to be midwives, to step in to the place that he calls us and to trust him in doing right as we act justly, as we love mercy, and as we walk humbly with God. So it continues on 19, verse 19, chapter 1. The midwives answered Pharaoh, Hebrew women are not like Egyptian women. They are vigorous and give birth before the midwives arrive. That's being wise. They had something to say, and they were able to step in and defend the Israelite women and the babies and families against injustice, against oppression. So God was kind to the midwives, and the people increased and became even more numerous. And because the midwives feared God, he gave them families of their own. That's verse 21. So you see that midwives, we can say, are not just helping women to give birth in this situation, but they are stepping in the gap and they're making choices in the face of dilemma to make a difference. Now we have midwives in our history, midwives that have taken a role, whether men or women, to step into the gap in times of injustice, in times of racism, and in times of oppression. There are people in our history that have taken the chance and stepped in to be able to make a difference. That's why we're celebrating Juneteenth, right? Juneteenth will be celebrated on June 19th. And as a church, we can't take that lightly. That's an important part of history. Juneteenth is short for June 19th. And according to the History Channel, it marks the day when federal troops arrived in Galveston, Texas in 1865 to take control of the state and ensure that all enslaved people would be free. Now, the interesting thing is Juneteenth came a year and a half after the Emancipation Proclamation. And even though that declared the end of slavery, it didn't take an effect. There are different years during the time after 1863 that states were recognizing the freedom that is naturally a person's to enslave African Americans. And so there was still that struggle, right? So on Juneteenth, we honor it because it honors the end to slavery in the United States, and it's considered the longest running African American holiday. On June 17, 2021, it officially became the federal holiday. So how can we connect this to midwives? Because before the Emancipation Proclamation, before Juneteenth, there were men and women who stood in the gap to help produce or bring forth freedom, to bring forth justice, to bring forth righteousness. And I just want to name a few. There's Elizabeth Freeman, who's known as Mom Bet, who was a driving force in ending the enslaved people trade in Massachusetts. She sued and was granted her freedom in 1781 with retribution. So she gained her freedom and she was given a monetary retribution, which she shared with her family. Another midwife of the many, many midwives is Frances E.W. Harper, who lived from 1825 to 1911. And she publicly advocated abolition and education through her writings and speeches. And she was the first African American to publish a short story. We also have Mary Ann Shadd Cary, who was an active abolitionist, who was the first African American newspaper editor. And not only that, she helped in the Civil War. And she was the second African American to receive a law degree from Howard University. These are all midwives because, in the face of injustice, they took a chance that was worth it and they risked their lives, they made sacrifices, and they suffered to see a people move forward in an independence and freedom that is rightfully theirs. Finally, one very special midwife is Harriet Tubman. And I want to say that these are just a few of the many, many African Americans who have acted as midwives in history. Harriet Tubman was a conductor of the Underground Railroad. Now, Harriet Tubman was a true midwife. She, according to history.com, Harriet Tubman was an escaped enslaved woman who became a conductor on the Underground Railroad, leading enslaved people to freedom before the Civil War, all while carrying a bounty on her own head. But she was also a nurse, a Union spy, and a women's suffrage supporter. Tubman is one of the most recognized icons in American history today, and her legacy has inspired countless people from every race and background. This is one of her quotes. I was the conductor of the Underground Railroad for 8 years, and I can say what most conductors cannot say. I never ran my train off the track, and I never lost a passenger. We know that she had great faith in God as she took on the challenge of not just accepting the circumstances of oppression and injustice, but instead she moved forward with great courage, with great faith as a midwife before the Civil War. So those are lessons in history. What is our lessons today as Christians? As Christians, we're called to be midwives. Midwives in our home, midwives in our neighborhood, midwives in our community, right? And say, oh, I'm not a midwife. I would never help a woman to give birth. But it's more than that. A midwife is considered spiritually to be a companion, a guide, a sister, a brother who helps someone during difficult physical, emotional, and spiritual transitions. A midwife holds hope in desperate times. A midwife encourages and helps a person get through the struggle. And as a church, we're called to be midwives for those who are going through so many different things. Our children are going through so many challenges, so many fears, so many concerns, so many anxieties. But as a people, as a Christian, we can offer our lives and be midwives as we pray for others, as we fast over different situations, as we knock on the doors of our neighbors just to see how we can help them. When we know someone is going through a difficult challenge, being there with them while they're going through the challenge, that is the call that God has for us as a people of God, that we can be midwives in the time of injustice, in the time of so much fear and anxiety, and even in times of uncertainty. With faith in God, we can be the instrument that God can use to help people get through difficult physical, emotional, and spiritual transitions. God bless you. Thank you for joining us in this week's Nuggets of Hope. We hope you continue to join us, and we hope that you are blessed by each teaching. You can join us on Instagram, Facebook, or YouTube. God bless you.